serious?
Welcome back to another video. I was able to grab some of the PoE2 passive tree during my playthrough at the LA event, and I'm making a short series of videos covering some of the more interesting nodes. Today it's the strength dexterity-aligned portion of the tree, where the Mercenary starts. We're beginning with a keystone which is located towards the outer edge at an equal distance from both the Merc and Warrior stars. This one is really cool. So Bulwark makes it so that your dodge roll no longer has any avoidance frames, but changes it to provide 30% less damage from hits while dodge rolling. Now, one of the big questions for me here is how long you gain this 30% less hit damage bonus for, because the default dodge roll only avoids hits during the early portion of the roll. The latter portion, where you're covering less ground, is when you're vulnerable to being hit. But this keystone would imply that the 30% less damage from hits bonus is active for the full duration of the dodge roll. Regardless, this one is great for generally tankier builds that have a good amount of recovery, and importantly it allows the dodge roll to provide defense against area of effect hits, which it otherwise wouldn't do. Next we have Apocalypse, which is found right on the outer edge of the tree. Look at this, 40% reduced damage. Herald skills deal 200% increased damage. I actually think this node is going to be incredibly useful for mapping. We know that Heralds are somewhat similar to PoE1, providing a boost to the character and having some on-kill effects which are typically very good for clear. For example, Herald of Ash, which burns surrounding enemies based on overkill damage. This node will improve those on-kill effects whilst making your own damage a bit weaker. However, it's very possible that we end up getting some unique items to make Heralds more single-target focused, changing how their effects proc or something similar, so look out for that with this node. Check out this one, Cull the Hordes. 25% increased culling strike threshold. In a previous video, I speculated that culling strike threshold may be a stat in PoE2 after the change to this mechanic from PoE1. In PoE2, culling strike is based on monster rarity, 30% for normal, 20% for magic, 10% for rare, and 5% for unique. This node would act as a multiplier on those thresholds. For example, magic monsters would now be culled at 25% of maximum life, while uniques would be culled at 6.25% of maximum life. It will be interesting to see just how accessible this stat is elsewhere, and also how easy it will be to get culling strike on a character. I'd guess it's going to be quite a rare modifier to obtain, considering it looks like it will be an entire node on the Witch Hunter. In fact, perhaps the Witch Hunter will have increased culling strike threshold somewhere on its tree. We'll have to wait and see. Okay, look at this one. Fast Metabolism. Yep, that's Overleech on a notable in PoE2. Default Leech is removed when an unreserved resource is topped off, and this modifier will make it so that recovery keeps going even when full. A bit like regeneration. There's a couple of things to discuss with this one. Firstly, I think that Overleech in general is going to be a bit weaker in PoE2 if the default leech duration is 1 second. You're going to want to find modifiers to extend that duration to make this form of recovery feel better in situations where you need to move and are unable to hit for a while, like when you're dodging boss abilities. Secondly, notice that this node specifies unreserved life, which implies that there may be ways to reserve your life in PoE2. Next is another keystone, a returning keystone from PoE1, Glancing Blows, which finds itself in a different location on the tree. This one is restored to its pre-nerf state from PoE1. Block chance is doubled, you take 50% of damage from blocked hits. Now, by default, blocking a hit prevents all of the damage from that hit, and prevents any on-hit effects. Glancing Blows will improve your passive chance to block, but make you take half of the damage from those hits. However, importantly, it will still prevent on-hit effects such as ailment application. You won't want to be clicking this keystone if you intend on using active block a lot, as that mechanic already has 100% chance to block from the front when it's in use. The effectiveness of Glancing Blows is massively improved by any recover on block mechanics, so we'll have to wait and see if they exist in PoE2. You could pair Glancing Blows with Lay Siege, a notable located close to the Merc star. This one grants 1% increased damage per 1% block chance. Passive block chance has a default cap of 75%, at which point you'd be gaining 75% increased damage from this notable, which is good value, but notice the layout of this cluster, requiring a decent amount of points to reach the notable. This one may end up just being a decent anoint for some builds. Alright, next are two nodes, both with increased cooldown recovery rate, Distracting Presence, and Multitask. It seems that CDR may be a bit easier to obtain in PoE2, but it's also possible that it doesn't really exist much at all on gear. We'll have to wait and see if that's the case. On this area of the tree, faster cooldowns will primarily benefit grenades, but the Hammer of the Gods skill also comes to mind. Distracting Presence is particularly interesting, reducing the CDR for enemies in your presence. This is pretty much the same as the Saboteur's like Clockwork notable from PoE1, only the radius on presence is larger than nearby. This node should be very useful on bosses to prevent them from using their abilities as often, creating more windows to deal damage. Look at this one, Quick Change Act. 50% increased weapon swap speed. That's an intriguing stat. This is located near the Mercenary star. Now we know that you'll have weapon-specific passive skill points that can be allocated to each set, and you'll be able to assign a specific skill to a specific weapon set and automatically swap to that set when using that skill. When this happens, there's a short delay incurred by the weapon swap, and this node will help to get that skill use out faster by shortening the weapon swap animation. Of course, it will also affect any manual weapon swaps that you perform as well. If you're pathing through the middle section here, I could see this node being worth the 2 points. For example, on a grenade build that wants some utility-focused stats on a weapon while using Flash Grenade before switching back to a DPS setup. Next up we have Repeating Explosives, which is right on the outer edge of the tree. Not too much to say about this one other than it just being really strong, especially when used with a damage-focused grenade that's linked to multiple projectile support, where you get a ton of value out of each grenade rolling this chance to activate twice. Now speaking of grenades, check out this wheel right here, located right in the middle of the Strength Dex area. This wheel has two notables, Cluster Bombs and Grenadier. These two notables, along with the previous Repeating Explosives notable, are going to be pretty much always taken on any grenade-focused build because they're just too good to pass up. The additional grenade projectile, along with the extra cooldown use, has some serious value for a skill like Flash Grenade, which only has a single cooldown use by default. These two nodes will essentially quadruple the effectiveness of this skill, as you'll now have two uses instead of one, and each use will throw two grenades by default, allowing you to stun bosses much faster. In general, the extra grenade projectile is kind of crazy because we know that you'll only be able to use each support gem once in your build, and that means multiple projectile support can only go on one of your grenade abilities. Having this node will mean that each grenade skill will at least throw two grenades by default, which is just crazy value for a notable passive skill. Alright, I've left two wild notables until the end. Firstly, Polymathy, located at the outer edge of the tree, right in the middle. 10% increased attributes. All attributes. That's kind of crazy. We know that there will be a lower allocation of attributes on the tree, with each highway node providing 5 instead of 10, while the stat notables will provide 25 of an attribute instead of 30 in PoE1. However, if attributes can be obtained in decent quantities on gear, this kind of notable becomes very desirable, especially in regards to strength builds, not just for the life they'll be gaining from that additional strength, but also in the use case of the Giant's Blood Keystone to help satisfy that doubled attribute requirement of weapons. Polymathy will likely end up being one of the very expensive anoints, considering it seems to pretty much be a best-in slot for any attribute stacking build. Okay, my favourite notable on this section of the tree is left till last. Levitation will make you unaffected by enemy ground effects for a second when first standing on them. This one is so cool, and it will be incredibly useful if we have anywhere close to the amount of enemy ground effects that exist in PoE1. Imagine just how useful this will be in boss arenas where there's some kind of ground denial effect that stacks up over time like we've seen in PoE1 boss fights. And that's it, a handful of interesting nodes in the strength, dexterity portion of the tree. If you've enjoyed this video and want to see more nodes in other parts of the tree, make sure to subscribe, as I'll be doing more videos like this one in the lead up to PoE2's early access launch on December 6th. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.